I became a Green Beret, served on a Special Forces team for a number of years. Part of that training, by the way, was training alongside of members of the IDF.
Really?
Yeah, and in this sense, they sent folks to come here and train with us at Fort Bragg. Wow. It's interesting that as Green Berets, we train a lot with foreign militaries. It's a big part of what we do, helping to develop the capacity of our allies so that they can fight their own fights and we don't have to do it for them. And so we often have what we call joint training, but it's really us training them. Like we go to train some of these other countries and they're the ones learning and we're the ones teaching. It was the opposite with the IDF. Like,
really?
Well, because these guys were, by nature of the work that they have to do, they're very experienced at urban warfare, counterterrorism.
Yeah, they grow up with feeling the threat against them.
Yeah, and so unlike when we're training with some other allied country, when we trained with the IDF, we said, okay guys, show us how you do it. We're gonna sit here and watch. And we thought, we're the highly trained Army Green Berets, but these guys knew what they were doing and they knew what they were fighting for. And that was impressed upon me as a young age. They were fighting for the modern state of Israel. They were fighting for the Jewish homeland. They were fighting for the protection of the Jewish people, for their way of life. And there was no question. They knew exactly why they were there and what their mission was.
Purpose.
And their purpose was.
Yeah.
And it was inspiring to see. And just beyond that, their skill, very good at what they do.
And welcome back to another episode of Ballots. This is your host, Rabbi Hillel Kappenstein, director of the Columbus Community Kollel. And it's a great honor and privilege to bring to you our next episode featuring Ohio's Secretary of State, Frank LaRose. Thank you so much for joining the show.
Rabbi, thank you so much. Great to be here.
It's an honor to welcome you to the Kollel. Thank you for coming out. I know we've been trying to coordinate this for some time, and I'm just so happy that you're here.
Well, it's a blessing. You had the chance to introduce me to some that are here studying right now, and it's just a special place, and I know this will be a special conversation.
Yeah, it sure will. So let's start. I know your background is just so incredible, how much you've dedicated yourself to the country and your time in the military, Special Armed Forces. Can you tell us about that?
Well, like most things in life, I was sort of mentored by someone who helped me see the right path for me. And really, I considered military service sort of like a calling. It was my Boy Scout leader, believe it or not,
wow.
who, when I was a kid, he was already in his 70s. He was a World War II veteran. He was a concentration camp liberator.
Wow.
He was a veteran of the OSS, which ran the French underground, resisting the Nazi occupation of France, and then was part of the Normandy invasion. And again, as a young infantry officer, liberated the Orndorff Nord concentration camp. I remember at 14 years old, sitting at the campfire at Boy Scout camp, and Bill Miller looking me in the eye and saying, "Frankie, people will tell you someday that the Holocaust never happened." Prophetic words, right?
Yeah.
And he said, "I want you to hear my story." And then, he went on to talk about the horrors that he discovered as his platoon was encountering these camps. And the first one, they thought it was just a military training camp. They saw high walls and sort of the quadrant that you see in a military camp. And they sent somebody with a tank to go knock down this big wooden wall door. And when the door fell, he saw emaciated victims. He saw those who had been killed. He said that the ashtray still had cigarettes smoldering in it from where the Nazis had just left.
Wow.
Just unimaginable horrors that we need to call out. He saw a lampshade made of human skin. And he told me these stories as a kid. And so he was one of those American military officers that had the foresight to make the local population from the village come and help to bury the bodies, because he wanted to make sure not only that he needed the workforce, but that they saw what happened right in their own town, and that there would be an opportunity for them to realize the full horrors of what they had allowed to happen.
Right.
So I knew from a young age that Bill Miller lived a life bigger than himself.
Yeah.
We just lost him a few years ago after a very long, full life in his late 90s. We laid him to rest. I was able to put on my Army uniform to be part of the ceremony honoring him. And but I knew from a young age that he had done something remarkable. And so with whatever wisdom a teenage kid can muster, I knew that I wanted to be a soldier. And so I enlisted when I was 17, left for basic training when I was 18. Never looked back. I loved it. I was where I belonged. And I guess I was a much more serious student when I finally did go to college after 10 years in the military. But I knew that the education I was getting in the Army was a great one. I had the chance to deploy to Kosovo. I had the chance to deploy to the U.S.-Mexican border as part of a counter-narcotics task force.
Wow.
And was looking for a new challenge. And so a man from my church encouraged me to try out to become a Green Beret. And I thought, there's no way I can do that, but I wanted to at least give it a try. And so by the grace of God, I was able to get through the pretty difficult training that you have to go through, and became a Green Beret, served on a Special Forces team for a number of years. Part of that training, by the way, was training alongside of members of the IDF.
Really?
Yeah, and in this sense, they sent folks to come here and train with us at Fort Bragg. Wow. It's interesting that as Green Berets, we train a lot with foreign militaries. It's a big part of what we do, helping to develop the capacity of our allies so that they can fight their own fights and we don't have to do it for them. And so we often have what we call joint training, but it's really us training them. Like we go to train some of these other countries and they're the ones learning and we're the ones teaching. It was the opposite with the IDF. Like,
really?
Well, because these guys were, by nature of the work that they have to do, they're very experienced at urban warfare, counterterrorism.
Yeah, they grow up with feeling the threat against them.
Yeah, and so unlike when we're training with some other allied country, when we trained with the IDF, we said, okay, guys, show us how you do it. We're going to sit here and watch. And we thought, we're the highly trained Army Green Berets, but these guys knew what they were doing, and they knew what they were fighting for. And that was impressed upon me as a young age. They were fighting for the modern state of Israel. They were fighting for the Jewish homeland. They were fighting for the protection of the Jewish people, for their way of life. And there was no question. They knew exactly why they were there and what their mission was.
Purpose.
And their purpose was.
Yeah.
And it was inspiring to see. And just beyond that, their skill, very good at what they do.
Wow. So maybe for those who are not familiar, how does it work in the Green Beret? Tell us a little bit about the training and what that entails once you're finished the training.
Yeah, so first there's a selection process. It's the tryouts, right? And there's the old Barry Sadler song about the ballot of the Green Berets. 100 men will test today and only 3 win the Green Beret. That ballot is not quite accurate. The number is more like 10 out of 100 from what I could see.
Wow.
But out of 100 people that start the selection process, about 10 get selected. Most either get injured or quit on their own. The vast majority say, hey, I can't do this, and they VW, voluntarily withdraw is what we call it. But among those that stay and get selected, and part of that 10%, then we go on to 2 years of training. Everything from language training, we're expected to be bilingual, to our specialty training. I trained as an engineer, and so I was the explosives tech for my team, in charge of logistics for my team. Others trained to become medics or communication sergeants, weapons sergeants, that kind of thing. And it's also a lot of training in what we call unconventional warfare, which is really this idea that you fight by, with, and through a indigenous force. It's not, we're going to send the 82nd Airborne Division in to fight the bad guys. We're going to partner with the local population, the local military, to help them defeat a common enemy. So in that sense, we're sort of the soldier diplomats. We are expected to sort of immerse ourselves into the local culture. We operate in a very low-key way. We don't make a big statement. We wear plain clothes. If the local population grows long beards, we grow long beards.
Wow.
We sit and eat roasted goat with them or whatever they do. And but that training that we do at Fort Bragg is really just the tip of the iceberg, because once you get to your team, the training continues. When I got out of the training and joined my team, my Special Forces team, we immediately deployed to Morocco. At the time, it was the beginning of the American war in Iraq, and we were working to develop the capacity of our allies, in this case the Moroccans, to help prepare them to hopefully join that effort. We then deployed to Oman, the Sultanate of Oman. And here's a name that it's going to sound familiar. We were training the Omani military to counter the threat of a group of people called the Houthi rebels.
Yeah.
Well, so we were in the western part of Oman and training the Omani military to deal with this group that was already then, years ago, starting to cause a lot of trouble. They obviously have continued to. And then we had the chance to deploy to Iraq. My trip to Iraq was really an interesting one. Sad in the sense that we lost 2 teammates, but fulfilling in the sense that we were training the first Iraqi SWAT team. So we recruited a group of traffic cops, local Iraqi police officers, and then we helped sort of mold them into a tactical police force, their first SWAT team. And when we first started hitting targets, we would tell them, all right, you guys sit in the Humvees and watch what we do. And then, after a couple months of that, it was, hey, you come along with us. And by the time we left, we could sort of sit back and watch them go in and raid the building or arrest the bad guy or whatever it may be. And it was really fulfilling to watch these Iraqi men take up the responsibility of protecting their own country.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah.
wow, it's tremendous. So now tell us a little bit about your journey in Ohio to public office and Secretary of State.
So as I told you, I'd gotten a great education in the Army in practical matters like leadership. I mean, I got promoted to sergeant when I was still 20 years old, so I wasn't old enough to drink a beer legally anyway. But I was old enough to lead men in combat according to the United States Army. And so I got a great education in practical matters, but I knew that as I was approaching my 30s, that I wanted to get a formal education. And so I made the somewhat difficult decision to leave the military and to focus full-time on my studies at Ohio State. And I earned a business degree, but while I was there, I was looking for something more than just going to class. Again, at 28 years old, I was too old to join a fraternity. I would have been the old guy. And so I started meeting some people, again, by accident, just kind of good luck or good fortune, that I met some folks that were working on campaigns. And it was, hey, come and volunteer, help us assemble yard signs, help us knock on doors. One of the candidates that I got to work for early on was a young fellow Army veteran who was running for the state Senate, a guy named Steve Stivers, who's gone on to serve in Congress and now is the head of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. So I got to volunteer on these campaigns and really got a practical education in how to engage politically, how to run a campaign, how to be successful. And when I graduated, I had one of those crossroads moments in life. I had my business degree from Ohio State. My wife was encouraging me to take that business degree and go out and get a job and earn a living and live a sort of a normal, quiet life. That's where my head was leading me. However, my heart was leading me to run for public office. You can see which one I listened to.
Yeah, exactly.
And again, with Lauren's blessing, we moved home to Akron, where I was born and raised, and took a chance on a long shot race. Nobody thought a Republican could win in Summit County, deep blue Akron, Ohio. And I ran for the state Senate when nobody thought it was possible, and I was able to win by working hard. Again, sort of organizing it like a special forces mission, an unconventional approach to winning that, a grassroots campaign with, even building support among parts of the community that maybe hadn't heard from a Republican candidate in a long time. I was going to labor unions and African American churches and getting to know people, and was able to be successful in that. So I showed up in the state Senate and was the kind of accidental state senator in my early 30s. Built a reputation in a couple things. I was the transportation chairman, so worked on transportation budgets, these multi-billion-dollar budgets that help us build the infrastructure that we need to succeed as a state. Also worked a lot on business-related issues, helping to streamline regulations and cut taxes, get government out of the way so that the private sector could thrive.
Yeah.
But the name I made for myself was on elections issues. And in the term-limited state legislature, you've only got sort of 8 years to make a name. for yourself or to show some credibility. And so once I started working on bills like improving overseas military voting, creating the process for removing deceased voters from the voter rolls, funding for new voting machines, and a whole variety of other things, I became known as the go-to guy on elections issues. And so when
this is as a
state senator.
Oh, wow.
And so when John Husted was term limited and not able to run again for Secretary of State, I thought, well, maybe I should do that.
With all that experience.
Got this experience on election law. And so I ran for Secretary of State. And I'll tell you, it's been a rewarding experience, also a very challenging experience. 6 years that I've been doing this job, we've been through some trying times.
Yeah.
When I first was sworn in 2019, nobody had ever heard of a pandemic or COVID or whatever else. But then, that was dropped on our plate. How do we run a presidential election in the midst of all of this uncertainty? Well, Ohio stepped up and we shined. When the rest of the country was losing their heads and making bad decisions, Ohio stayed the course. We ran elections that were honest, but also accessible. And we had absolutely record-breaking turnout in 2020. And then we get into 2021 and 2022 and all of the changes that came about as a result of the redistricting process and legal challenges and what I would argue was an activist set of opinions from the Ohio Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time. And so how do we respond to that and get through it? Layer in on top of that epic levels of concern about election integrity, some of it based in reality, other not, right?
Just a lot of noise.
A lot of noise, but we were able to work through that. So I've had the unofficial motto for our team that we run elections so well that even the loser knows they lost. Now, of course, the winner knows they won.
Yeah.
They're going to go out and give a victory speech, right? But you need to do it so well. We do it so well in Ohio, so transparently, so by the book, so above board, that even the loser knows they lost. And hopefully 10:30, 11 o'clock on election night, they call the winner and congratulate them and recognize, hey, if I'm going to run again, I got to try harder next time. That's the standard that we meet. And this is why Ohio is the gold standard for elections.
Yeah, I was going to say, throughout the country, people talk about Ohio. I think a couple other states too, but to your credit, specifically, can you walk us through some of the things that you tried to pinpoint and really perfect? Because it's, we talk about, election and specifically voting, the privilege and the right and what Americans, this is, the pillar of democracy. Can you walk us through some of the things that you really had to pinpoint and focus on and perfect to it reach this high level?
Let's start off with something else first. We are emotional as Americans about elections. We're emotional about voting rights. We're emotional about election integrity. That's good news. I've had the chance to be an election observer all over the world. I've been part of these delegations that get put together to go observe elections in places like Ukraine. I observed the election where Zelensky was elected. In Nigeria, I was there a couple of years ago. I saw Iraqis vote for the first time when I was in Iraq. I've seen it in Africa. And so, this is something that in a lot of parts of the world, people don't invest a lot of emotionality in elections because they just don't really have much faith that it's going to make a difference.
So they throw the towel?
They tend to just sort of not put a lot of emotion into it. They just don't get so emotional. But viscerally, we as Americans, we know that our vote is our voice, and we know that a vote really makes a difference, and we know that elections have consequences. And so we get emotional, again, about voting rights. We get emotional about election integrity. That's good news, right? We should celebrate that. The problem is sometimes it is misused by those that are trying to motivate human behavior for their own reasons, right? Vote for me and I'll fix this, or I'll, there's widespread fraud or widespread voter suppression. Both not true, right? I mean, we work hard to keep voter fraud and voter suppression rare. When they happen, we work to prosecute them because it's immoral, it's ugly, it's unethical. So how do we do this in Ohio? Well, it starts with even the structure of how elections are organized. In Ohio, it's a completely bipartisan enterprise. A lot of people don't pause to think about that.
This is my first time hearing that.
Yeah, it's Republicans and Democrats working together for every part of the process. And it feels like in Washington, Republicans and Democrats can't agree what day of the week it is. But if you go to your county board of elections, the board of elections is 4 members, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and guess what? They work together really well. Their staff is half Democratic and half Republican. We follow a strict bipartisan chain of custody, so those ballots are always in joint custody of both Democrats and Republicans. On election night, when the voting location closes down, it's got to be a Democrat and a Republican that get in a car together to drive all that stuff to the Board of Elections so they can maintain that bipartisan chain of custody. Rabbi, even the building is bipartisan, and people say, well, all right, LaRose, how can a building be bipartisan? If you go visit your Board of Elections, there's 2 locks on the doors. That's because one lock corresponds to a key that only the Republicans have, and the other lock corresponds to the key that only the Democrats have. It's like those old submarine movies where it takes 2 keys to launch the torpedo, so one person couldn't do it by themselves. You've got to have the Democrat staff and the Republican staff to even unlock the door at the Board of Elections. So that bipartisanship is the foundation of how we run elections. It continues with list maintenance. We maintain accurate voter rolls. This is not controversial, it's common sense. We take deceased voters off the voter rolls. We do it every month. We get the list from the Department of Health. I helped write the bill that did that, and now I faithfully carry that out. We make sure that only American citizens can register and vote in the state of Ohio, and we check. We don't just take your word for it. We also check IDs. And this, again, shouldn't be controversial. It's common sense. You need an ID to get on an airplane or buy a 6-pack of beer. You've got to have an ID when you come to vote, and we enforce that. It continues with things like just the logistics of Election Day. People take this for granted because for each of us, it's a very individualized experience. We go to our polling place at the local high school or at the local synagogue or wherever the voting location is, and we cast our ballot and we go home, and that night we see the results come across the bottom of the screen, and we just don't think about all the mechanics that goes into it. Think of the scale of Election Day. It's about 3,500 to 4,000 voting locations throughout the state. So think about that. 4,000 voting locations. They're staffed by over 30,000 Election Day volunteers, half of them Democrats, half of them Republicans. You're talking about thousands of machines, millions of pieces of paper. It all has to be there at the right place at the right time. And so just the logistics of Election Day. We approach this with the level of care that I experienced as a Green Beret when we would do mission planning. It's not mission planning for a group of Army Green Berets is not like some Hollywood montage where you're just grabbing guns and jumping in trucks and gonna go shoot the bad guys. It's way more boring than that. It's hours at the dry erase board. It's thinking of everything that can go wrong. Helicopters that don't fly, guns that jam, radios that don't transmit, a bomb-sniffing dog that breaks a leg and now you gotta carry the thing 2 miles, whatever. You think through each of those and then you build into the plan safeguards so that none of those can become a showstopper. That's the kind of approach that we've had to elections in Ohio. We call it the Ready for November Task Force, right? And it's just that. It's working with 88 county boards of elections to make sure that things will go wrong on Election Day. Power outages, law enforcement involved incidents, bomb threats, but none of those can become a showstopper. The other way, again, military wisdom here, we had a saying in the Army that you sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle. It sounds dramatic. You sweat in training so you don't bleed in battle.
I get the general idea.
But it's just basic preparation, right? So before the action starts, you need to do the preparation so that when the action's happening, you're ready to go. And that's the approach that we take to Election Day. And then, of course, the post-election period. In Ohio, every ballot's on paper. And that's not a question. Whether you vote on a touchscreen and it prints off the paper, or whether you fill in an oval, it's all on paper. So election night, we count those ballots with a machine so you can get that quick result. We want to know on election night. Ohio does this. Other states continue to struggle with this. We let you know those results on election night, but then we go back a couple weeks later and we count the paper. We call that a post-election audit. So we don't just have electronic or just paper. We have both in parallel.
It kind of sounds like a trust but verify.
Exactly. The two have to match up. So I've had people say, all right, LaRose, why don't we just get rid of voting machines altogether? And they say, well, you can't cheat with paper if we just had hand-counted paper. Well, that's not true either. Chicago in the 1960s proved that people can cheat with paper. You can't just rely on one methodology or another. You want to have both in parallel. And so the two have to check out. And this is why when we count the paper and compare it to the electronic result during the 6 years that I've been in office, and we do this for every election, including those small sort of so-called off-year elections, we've had an accuracy rate above 99.9%.
Wow.
When you compare the paper to the electronic result. So Ohioans know that they can trust their results. And as you mentioned, we've become a national role model. It's not because we're geniuses either. There are two states that are known for really running good elections. It's Ohio and Florida. And it's intuitive
Florida.
learning. For 25 years, these are the two states that have been in the national spotlight. And so we've perfected this. We've fought off the bad lawsuits that are trying to change the rules at the last minute. We've developed good procedures. And so it's no wonder that just a couple weeks ago, who was called to the White House to meet with the president's policy team to talk about the president's executive order on elections? It was me, as the Ohio Secretary of State, and it was a guy named Cord Byrd, the Florida Secretary of State, and a few other secretaries from around the country. But these are states that are recognized as the example. Now what we need to do is take those best practices and encourage other states to do
so
the same.
I love how your military background had some lessons learned in leadership, and you didn't keep it to the military. You were able to carry the things that could help you along the way. I know there has been talk about elections becoming federal, and maybe not the best idea.
Probably a bad idea.
But what I'm wondering is if there's a way for, and I'm just thinking out loud, for the federal to implement, this is the way the states do it.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
So there are ways to encourage that. I think it is a feature, not a glitch, of the American system that we have a very decentralized system of elections. There's no national election. There are 50 state-by-state elections.
Right,
those
Electoral
results,
College, yeah.
Exactly. Those results aggregate to give us a national result. But even at the state level, we don't really run a statewide election so much as we run 88 county elections. Ooh. Those results aggregate up. So again, that power has been devolved to the local level, right, where there's the most accountability and personal sort of local control, and that's how it should remain. There are, however, things the federal government can do and has historically done. Things like the Help America Vote Act, Motor Voter, the Voting Rights Act are all examples of things the federal government has done where they haven't taken control of elections.
Yeah.
They have
like assisted?
Exactly. Yeah. Assisted and also encouraged best practices. And again, I've been to a lot of countries where they have, in fact, I spent a long time in Israel studying their system of elections. There's a woman, now when I first became Secretary of State, I reached out to a woman named Orly Adas, and Orly runs elections for the state of Israel. Her office is right there in the Knesset building. And she was kind enough to let me spend a week traveling around Israel with her, learning. And I thought, well, here's some comparisons. Ohio's a state of 8 million registered voters. Israel's a country of about 8 million.
Yeah.
You know, Israel is a country surrounded by neighbors that want them dead. We have Michigan, not quite the same. So like, you know, they have a lot of challenges that they face in Israel, but they still continue to run good, trustworthy elections. They have been able to fight off cyber incidents, physical security incidents, disinformation campaigns, and continue to run good elections. So I thought this is worth learning for. And I shadowed Orly for a week, and she took me to the place where they count the ballots, where they print the ballots, to local voting locations. I sat with her cybersecurity team, her public information team. It was a really good learning experience. But again, they have a national election system. It works for Israel. We don't want to have a national election system. The solution is the federal government encouraging best practices through funding mechanisms and that kind of thing, such as Ohio has. And then there are tools that the federal government needs to give us. Unfortunately, I was left with no option last year but to sue the Biden administration because they were not giving us citizenship data. They exclusively have the list of who's a citizen and who's not. I was
exclusively to them?
Well, sure. The federal government maintains the naturalization process. So when someone takes the oath of citizenship, when someone comes to this country, they know who's a citizen and who's not. We have some of that data through the BMV, our Bureau of Motor Vehicles, but it's not complete.
That's if you register a car or get a license.
Yeah, and you have to show it, when you first establish your identity with the state, you have to show your birth certificate. So we know generally who's a citizen and who's not, but how about people that have come here? Have they naturalized, or are they still a non-citizen? So that data is maintained by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and they weren't giving it to us. And so I sued the Biden administration. Again, this is something the federal government should be doing, and thankfully the Trump administration has worked to address this. I've got a great relationship with Secretary Noem, the new Secretary of Homeland Security.
Kristi Noem, yeah.
And her team is working very closely with us to make sure that we have access to that so that we can continue to check our voter rolls to make sure that only American citizens are registered. That's just one example of things the federal
it sounds like the right arm's got to talk to the left arm.
Absolutely. And this is the nature of a decentralized system. These are the challenges you got to work through, because if the states run it, then we are going to rely on the feds for certain things. So.
And this is more like broadly, but that's kind of the way I thought the country was set up, that you have the United States, and then you have states that kind of have like their own vibe and their own style and their own culture, but on things like democracy and voting, they got to be together.
Yeah. Well, and that's why you see different states have taken different approaches. Like, for example, Ohio has made it convenient to vote for a long time. For over 20 years now, we've been a national model with 4 weeks of early voting, with absentee voting, with election day voting. You got those three choices. You can vote by mail from home, you can vote early at the border, you can vote in person on election day.
I've gotten mail from you. So.
Oh, there you go. But we make you prove your identity. So contrast that. Some states, particularly Western states like Washington State and Oregon and now Colorado and a few others, they've started sending out absentee ballots even to people that didn't request one. I think that's a foolish idea. In Ohio, we send you a request form. We ask you, do you want, but then you have to prove your identity before we send you the
two-step process.
Ballot. Of course, right? And so this is just an example of how states can take differing approaches. But again, I think Ohio has struck that balance. We don't have to choose between making it either convenient or secure, right? We don't have to choose between easy to vote or hard to cheat. We can have both easy to vote and hard to cheat. And it's it's a matter of maintaining that balance. And I think that we've done a good job of that in Ohio.
Wow. Can you share with us some of the common questions, challenges, or critiques, and how you answer them to try to let's keep faith in the system? Yeah.
Again, back to that emotionality that we have about elections. I think that partisans have sometimes used that strong emotional connection that we have to elections to drive a particular agenda. Sometimes you'll hear from the right that there is widespread systemic voter fraud. Or you'll hear from the left that there is widespread systemic voter suppression. Let's take a breath here and just stop the rhetoric for a second. Voter suppression and voter fraud are both rare, and we have to keep them rare, right? I mean, and we've shown that in Ohio. So again, part of it is just helping to show people the truth, right? We have in the month leading up to election and on election day, we have a social media rapid response team that will identify false information and just rebut it with the truth, right? I'll give you a classic example. In 2022, somebody posted a photo of a burning box truck, just like a rental truck, like a U-Haul truck or whatever else. And this photo, the caption on Facebook or Twitter or whatever else said, I'm a poll worker, an election official in Hamilton County, and this is my truck full of ballots. It's burning. I wonder if your ballot is one of them. Whoa, well, that gets our attention. That's very concerning. So we simply took that and did a reverse image search, and we found that it was not in Ohio, had nothing to do with elections. It wasn't even from this decade. It was from 2012. And it was just a run-of-the-mill traffic accident in Texas of a truck burning. And so we were able to watermark that with, debunked, false, and put it back out there to make sure that people were empowered with accurate information. That's just one example.
So that leads me to my next question, and that is, this is a balance, and I have this in my line of work as well, the need to respond versus no, I'm not even giving this attention. And I know it might be case by case, but can you share with us some overall guidelines?
Well, and this candidly is a friction that we have within our own office. We debate this constantly between the communications staff and me. I want to respond to everything. Right? Set the record straight. Sometimes you're just giving it.
You're highlighting,
oxygen, right? And sometimes people are just being sensational to try to get attention, to make themselves
get followers,
famous on the internet or whatever else. And so what we tend to look for is when something starts to get traction, when people start to buy into it. And then we'll engage, or when we think something has a high likelihood. I'll give you another example. There was a case in 2020 where someone, again on the social media, which is again a blessing and a curse.
It sure is.
Somebody started saying they're a grad assistant student at Ohio State, and they work in the mailroom for one of the dorms. And they said when they get a ballot from one of their fellow students that they know is a Republican, they throw it away. When they get a ballot from one of their students they know is a Democrat, they deliver it. Well, we knew that was the kind of thing that would, and so we investigated. We said, let's contact Ohio State Student Services, their mail handling. And what we realized was that this was not the way that's handled, and it was not a possibility that could happen. And so we simply worked with OSU to make sure that accurate information was put out there about that, so that somebody wasn't sort of using that to stoke fear or anxiety among people.
And the collaboration between the university and yourselves went well?
Oh, very well.
Tremendous.
One other example on fighting voter suppression, because again, these are two sides of the same coin, voter fraud and voter suppression, both ugly, both illegal. We built a partnership with a group of African American ministers in Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus, a lot of major cities around Ohio, and we trained them to recognize disinformation, because the ugly reality is that racial minority groups are often the targets of this kind of thing, because what it does is simply identifies an existing grievance and then inflames it, right? And so because of this partnership we'd built with clergy leaders, community leaders, that kind of thing, in 2020, when there was a group of people doing a really racist robocall, one of these auto dials, these recorded calls, it went out into the Cleveland African American community, and it was trying to scare people to not vote early. And it said, if you show up to early voting, they can arrest you if you have a warrant out for you. Not true. Or they said, if you vote absentee, creditors can use that to find your address and make you pay past due bills. Again, not true. And again, based on racist stereotypes and all kinds of things. But because of the relationship we built with these pastors, within minutes of that call going out, several of them had the common sense to record it, send it to me, and by the end of that day, we had already launched a law enforcement investigation with federal and state partners, and the bad guys got caught, and they faced justice for it. So like, those are examples of how, when people are paying attention, when they work with the right people, leaders in state government, we can bring justice to people that do the wrong thing.
Wow. No, and I think I hope one of the takeaways from this episode is that, the two locks, one for the Republican, one for the Democrat, kind of like radical transparency.
Yeah, I've used that term, radical transparency.
Yeah, and I say all the time, transparency is the best policy.
Yeah.
I love that.
Here's another example of where Ohio was the first in the nation. We passed a bill last year called the Data Act, and I'm working now to encourage other states to pass this. What we learned in 2020 is that there were different ways of keeping records at different boards of elections, and they didn't all line up. You couldn't really make an apples-to-apples comparison. Contrast that to the financial world. If you're going to invest your retirement savings in a company, a publicly traded company, you can make an apples-to-apples comparison between two companies and look at their financials, because there are generally accepted accounting principles, common charts, standard charts of accounts. They track things the same way. Boards of elections weren't doing that. Even something as simple as a cast ballot, you would think that's pretty intuitive. Somebody casts a ballot, that's a cast ballot. But here's an example. In some counties, if somebody got their ballot, didn't like any of the choices, and handed it back blank, that counted as a cast ballot with no votes. In other counties, they counted that as simply an abandoned ballot, and they didn't count it as a cast ballot, so the numbers would be off. So with the Data Act, we standardized the way that this data is accumulated throughout the state at all 88 boards of elections, and then we've put it on our website. If you go to ohiosos.gov/data, you can balance our checkbook. You can look at every number from every board of elections you'd ever want to look at, because there's nothing to hide. When you pull back the curtain and show people the raw data of how Ohio runs elections, they'll realize that we run it in an honest way.
Wow.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you mentioned about how, your trip to Israel and what you learned there. And I love the fact that Israel, of course, but you've also traveled around and tried to learn from other people. And, I say this all the time, like, we never stop learning. I say, I'm a rabbi, but I have a rabbi, and my rabbi has a rabbi. We're always learning. But, going back to your time in Israel, and everyone in Ohio and really beyond knows how much of a friend you are to the Jewish community and to the state of Israel. Beyond what you learned regarding elections, can you share with us a little bit about your relationship with the Jewish community, your trips to Israel, what you've learned, what you appreciate?
Yeah, so it started as a kid. We had neighbors, friends from school, the Geltzer family, Jewish family. Well, at Christmas, we put up a tree, they put up a menorah, we learned from each other. And they brought me into their home for Shabbat dinner. I got to have the Seder with them and that kind of thing. And so I did that as a kid. And so hopefully those kind of things continue. Hopefully the people that watch and listen to your podcast are taking that opportunity for some interfaith interaction. Invite your Christian friends, maybe even your Muslim friends, to come into your family and to learn these traditions and to demystify some of this stuff. I also had my mom's church. My mom was Presbyterian, is Presbyterian. My dad was Catholic, so I kind of grew up with those two Christian traditions. But my mom's church would do exchanges with the synagogue down the street. And so, we would have them over for a Christian holiday. They would have us over for a Jewish holiday, and we learned a lot from each other. So I guess I just sort of brought that foundation into my work in the military. It was sort of common sense to me. and again, having the chance to work with members of the IDF and seeing their dedication and traveling 5 different times to Israel.
Yeah.
I can tell you this, as an American, as a Christian, there's no place on the planet where I feel more at home, other than home, than I do in Israel. I again, wandering the streets of the old city, going to the wall, traveling to even the far northern, the Galilee region of Israel, traveling all over. I've just been very welcome there and found it very rewarding. I love the place. And when people have asked me why I'm so dedicated to Israel, I remind them that, first of all, as a Christian, my faith commands me. It's right there in Genesis. Bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse thee. We know that we're talking about God's chosen people, the state of Israel, the Jewish people. But even beyond that, if you're not a person of faith, if you don't have the foundation that I have, it just makes sense economically, diplomatically, militarily. Strategically.
Yeah.
You've got a country that is a beacon of democracy and human rights in the Middle East, in a place where those things are uncommon.
The region, yeah.
And I think that what some misguided American college students are getting wrong is that they're misunderstanding this. They view Israel as the oppressor, and they view the Palestinians as the oppressed. And so I think that the modern liberal mindset in particular is built to sort of identify who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed, and to side with the oppressed. Well, they're getting that wrong. Here's Israel, a country of 8 million people that has had to fight for its very existence for now 75 years, and surrounded by a lot of, we're talking about hundreds of millions of neighbors that want them dead, and are willing to engage in all manner of inhumanity to do that. The Israelis have every right to fight for their national sovereignty, for the protection of their people. If you notice, they don't start fights, but they sure as heck finish them. And they have to be allowed to do that. And the reason why I'm so proud when I walk around Israel as an American is that America was Israel's first ally. The first country to recognize the modern state of Israel. Goes back to Truman and a Jewish friend that he had, right? So President Truman had a Jewish friend from back home who gave him a love and appreciation for the Jewish people. And that man continued to remain friends with President Truman. And when he was in a position to make that decision, he knew the right thing to do, even though all the boys down the road at the State Department said, "Don't do it, Mr. President, don't do it. It's going to cause unrest in the Muslim world and whatever else." President Truman knew the right thing to do. And as soon as the founding of the modern state of Israel occurred, the United States recognized them. So we're Israel's first ally, and I would say still Israel's indispensable ally, and that bond needs to remain strong, and each generation needs to be responsible for doing that.
Yeah, wow, such beautiful, kind words. I appreciate that. You talked about some of the, disinformation, oppress and oppressor, and just a week or two ago, I saw a little. I wasn't able to stay for the whole film, showing of this documentary called October 8th, and it was very hard to watch. As I told people, like, you had one hand to clutch your heart and one hand to clutch your stomach when they showed some of the footage, and then they right after that showed some of these protests and genocide. And actually just a few months ago in this chair sat Vivek Ramaswamy,
my dear friend.
And he talked about, we discussed his trip to the DNC where he was mobbed by these people, and they tried getting him. He called out Israel for committing a genocide, and I thanked him for his kind words. And
that word means something.
Yes, and that was his point.
It's like the boy who cried wolf. You can't call something genocide when it's not, because it cheapens it.
Exactly. And I thanked him for saying what he said to those people that were very, very rude, and that's putting it mildly. And he said, "Listen, Rabbi, I appreciate the kind gesture, but let's take the word genocide for a second. The ethnic cleansing of an entire peoplehood, and actually the best place for the Palestinians to have a free and prosperous life in that region is in Israel."
On my most recent trip to Israel, I had the chance to go to the floor of the Knesset, which is like, having served in the state legislature and been to the U.S. Congress several times, it was a really remarkable experience. I heard a man up there giving a speech, and it didn't sound like Hebrew. And I turned to the guide that was with me, and I said, "He's speaking Arabic." And he said, oh yeah, he's a Palestinian Israeli. He's an Israeli citizen who serves in the Knesset, and he's speaking his native tongue, Arabic. Now, do you think that in the parliament of Gaza, or in the Hamas-run government body, they would dare allow someone to ever speak Hebrew? Of course not.
Exactly. Yeah. So that leads me to my question about education, and obviously in my position here, that's where it starts and ends.
Yeah.
Education. And now obviously we focus on rabbinic education and teaching Torah, et cetera. But when it comes to this, how do you feel we are best served to educate? Obviously, there are certain people just maybe not to focus on them. But the people that are kind of like, let's say, on the fence or impressionable or just don't really know much and they're just on TikTok and who knows what they see, what are some of the strategies you would like to recommend so we have proper education on this?
Well, again, it starts with human connections, like what I had as a child, where a Jewish family brought me in and taught me their traditions, and I was able to learn them. It's this concept in Judaism that I believe you all call tikkun olam. And that's been such a beautiful part of Judaism's embrace of the rest of the world, right? To heal the world, to make things better. And so continuing to be engaged philanthropically, as you all have, and just in a loving way with non-Jews, that's an important part of it. Also, I'm struck by when we go to Holocaust memorials, Holocaust Memorial Day, or when we go to the Holocaust Museum, or I've had the chance to go to Yad Vashem, life-changing experience, especially as someone who was mentored by a concentration camp liberator. So we say this phrase, never again. And it's almost too easy. We just say it. It's never again. And we mean it, but we have to manifest those words into action. When you say never again, you need to make that a solemn pledge, a promise that you're going to actually take action to make sure never again happens. And guess what? In October, a few years ago, never again happened. And again, not everybody's had the blessing that I have to be there. Like I was in Sderot just a few months before that. I traveled down through all the kibbutzim along the border, and so I was in Kfar Aza, where 50 or more beautiful children were murdered. I played soccer with kids when I was in Kfar Aza, so I know that I'm sure one of those kids that I was kicking a soccer ball with was probably one who was brutally murdered or more. I was getting text messages from friends in their safe rooms that day, so it was very personal for me. But for the rest of us that haven't had that experience, try to connect with understanding exactly what happened there and rededicate ourselves to never again. Never again means that when anti-Semitism shows its ugly head, we have to stamp it out. We can't tolerate it even for a moment. It means standing with our Jewish brothers and sisters. But it also means lovingly approaching our Muslim neighbors. And we have a large Muslim population here in Columbus. For them to understand that not only their faith tradition, but Judaism, Christianity are faith traditions that are based in peace and love and mutual understanding. I mean, that at least is my reading of them. And so those interfaith conversations that can happen are crucial. And then, of course, it means also steadfastly defending Israel's right to defend herself, and standing with Israel when it comes to providing military aid, but also moral support, just speaking out that Israel's doing the right thing. Israel didn't start this fight, but they have every right to finish this fight. And that means that this corrosive, ugly, radical ideology that is so pervasive in Gaza and also Judea and Samaria, that can't continue. You can't, by an overwhelming majority, elect a terrorist government and then allow that. Hamas was elected at 75%, I think. And so when you choose a terrorist government to govern yourself, then you also end up accepting the responsibilities that come with that. And that doesn't mean that we ever permit targeting of civilians. And the IDF is more careful than any modern military on the planet.
Hand out leaflets.
And it's not possible to avoid every instance, but the IDF tries very hard on this. They warn. They say, hey, we're going to attack this block. Civilians should get out. But as you know,
they hide behind them.
The IDF uses rockets to protect their people. Hamas uses people to protect their rockets.
Exactly.
They create human shields. They'll put military installations in schools and in mosques. Like these kind of things cause ugly realities to occur on a modern urban battle space.
Yeah, and that doesn't get talked about enough. That Douglas Murray's done a great job at making that point that Israel uses their IDF, the soldiers, to protect the civilians, and it's exactly the opposite. And that's where I think so much of this disinformation, and then you have to fight it with education, is so important.
And think about how inclusive the Israeli military are. There are Muslims that are members of the Israeli military, and as you know, for young Israelis, it's not just military service, it's very much a part of the culture as well. When I was there, I saw specialized units. We use this word inclusivity, and it's been, I think, misused by the left, but real inclusivity, where the IDF created units for developmentally disabled. So if you are a young Israeli with Down syndrome, you a few decades ago would have been excluded from military service, but now they create opportunities. We went and visited a whole unit of developmentally disabled Israelis. They get to wear the uniform. Wow, what pride they have in that. And maybe their job is assembling medical kits. Maybe their job is preparing food or putting ammunition into magazines, whatever their job may be that's consistent with their ability level, but they get to be part of their nation's defense. That's an amazing thing that Israel does.
Yeah, no, that's, and how much we appreciate you knowing that and being able to advocate that. And it's so important that leaders speak. It's, as the saying goes, it starts from the top.
Yeah.
And we need more of that.
Amen.
Yeah. Now, getting back to Ohio.
Yes.
What do you love so much about Ohio?
This has been home. I was born and raised here. I think that Ohio is a state that in many ways is a microcosm of our nation.
Yeah.
I think that Ohio brings economic and geographic and cultural diversity that other states don't have. I think that we've got a good mix between low cost of living and high quality of life.
Yeah.
Now, we all love our big cities on the East Coast or the West Coast. Those are great places to visit. If you look at the cost of life there, it's prohibitive.
Yeah.
In Ohio, you've got good culture, good arts, good dining, mediocre professional sports sometimes, but that's a separate, at least we got the Buckeyes. But you've got good culture here and relatively low cost of living. But the main thing is an opportunity for economic prosperity. And that's that sort of basic conservative principle that I have in free market economics. Ohio's that place where we've achieved, again, that right balance. I use that word balance a lot, but we have, we have adequate tax base to fund the things that we need, good schools, good public safety, good roads and infrastructure, but not this punitive level of taxation that pushes business away. We have the right level of regulations to protect air and water and workers' safety and rights, but not punitive, overarching, heavy-handed regulations that only serve to push businesses away. So it's about achieving that balance. And I think that Ohio's done that well. And we also have this Midwestern work ethic, right? It's just an amazing thing about us. And all of our families came here from somewhere else. My family came from Italy, settled for a few years in New York, and then were blessed to come to Akron, Ohio to work in the tire industry, right? Yeah. A lot of great Jewish families have similar experiences of coming to Ohio, but we've all kind of come to personify this Midwestern work ethic. That's just part of who we are. Ohioans are willing to get up in the morning, do an honest day's work, expect a fair wage for it, but we work hard for what we have here. Nothing's given in Ohio. Everything's earned. I think that's a big part of our culture that we need to be proud of as well. And
what are you most excited about the future of Ohio?
Yeah, well, I know this is not a political conversation per se, but politics comes into everything. I'm excited by a man who you interviewed, who I think is going to be our next governor. I'm running for auditor of state. I'll hopefully be a great partner. I know I'll be a great partner of his, but I think he's got a challenging vision for Ohio. This is a tough love kind of a vision where he's going to challenge Ohio to be the best version of what we can be. And that's what leaders do. Leaders don't encourage you to kick back and kick your feet up and have a cool drink. Leaders encourage you to go out there and do hard things and do it the hard way on purpose sometimes. When it comes to educational excellence, economic excellence, excellence in public safety, those are the things that Vivek is talking about. That's why I'm excited for what Ohio has in its future. I think our best days are ahead as a state. And I think that we're on the cusp of the next industrial revolution, right? And Ohio led the way in the last industrial revolution. I think we're going to lead the way in the next industrial revolution because of Ohio's greatest natural resource. We've got great natural resources, oil and water and gas and farmland and timber and all kinds of great things. But our greatest natural resource is our people. And it's because of Ohio's innovative, hardworking people that we are going to be a leading state in the next industrial revolution.
Oh, wow. So inspiring. As we wind down, one of the things that impresses me so much about you is your leadership at a relatively young age. As people consider public office when they're in college or in their 20s, what advice would you give them as they're making their choices?
So, Rabbi, I actually just was at the State House for some meetings with state legislators, and I ran into a school group, and I love this. I miss this from when I was in that building every day. And so I saw a school group, and I stopped them, and I introduced myself, and this was high school students, seniors, that their minds are already on graduation in a couple weeks and whatever exciting things are in their future. I challenged some of them to think about running for public office. And I said, listen, when I was a high school senior, if anybody had ever suggested that I would be running for public office, I would have laughed at them. I would have never thought that that was something I would do when I was 18 years old. But keep that option open in your mind. And remember that it's not as though someone sort of taps you on your shoulder and says, now it's your turn to run for public office. It's got to come from within.
From within.
Reminds me of a story from basic training. I remember in my first day of basic training, we're all brand new soldiers, just got our hair cut, just got green clothes, just got our, all the stuff. And I remember us all kind of milling around, and there was disorganization, and the drill sergeant came out and said, who's in charge? And of course, nobody stepped up, and so he made us do push-ups, he made us run, he just physically tormented us through physical fitness. And then he left, and then he came back a few minutes later and he said, I'm going to ask you again, who's in charge? Nobody stepped up, and there was just chaos and all of that. A third time when he came out, I think we started to catch on. He's looking for one of us to step up, right? He was teaching, and so he said, who's in charge here? And I remember sort of sheepishly stepping forward, and he said, who are you? And I said, Drill Sergeant, my name's LaRose, I'm from Ohio. And he said, all right, you're in charge. Take these men to the barracks. We've got to get some food and get some rest because tomorrow training starts early. And that was it. Now, what he was teaching us was a profound lesson that when there is no leader, there is chaos, there is disorder, and that when you see that chaos and that disorder, somebody has to step up and lead. Like Isaiah, they will be an imperfect servant, right? But like when the Lord says, who will go for us and whom shall I send? Somebody has to step up and say, here am I, send me. And again, an imperfect servant though we all are. And so that was the lesson, is step up and lead. Don't wait for your turn. There is no turn. Don't wait for somebody to tell you it's your time. When you see a need, step up and fill that need. Recognize that you're going to be an imperfect servant, but you're going to be able to grow into that job and do your best and hopefully help a group of people accomplish something that they wouldn't be able to accomplish otherwise.
The need is the tap on the shoulder.
Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay, so now as we finish, let's just do couple rapid fire questions.
Oh, good.
Okay, so Buckeyes or Browns?
Oh, that's tough. So I'm a lifelong Browns fan. And
who went to Ohio State in your family?
I did.
Ooh.
I went to Ohio State, and I'm a lifelong Browns fan. I'm going to say Browns.
Oh,
because
wow.
again, I've always wanted to cheer for the underdog.
Okay. Hidden talent or hobby people may not expect from you?
Oh, operating heavy equipment.
But people would expect that. You were in the military.
Well, my first job was heavy construction equipment, and I can drive a tractor trailer. I can run a bulldozer. I grew up doing farm work, so I know my way around a farm. In fact, I go back every summer and help bale hay. I enjoy that. So yeah, oddly, I've got this, and I don't brag about much. There's not much where I'm so good that I have a swagger to it. But when it comes to driving a tractor, running a bulldozer, driving a tractor trailer, I'm good at that.
That's great.
Yeah.
And lastly, if you were not in public office, what do you think you'd be doing now?
I'd either be a soldier or a farmer. And I loved being a soldier. It was very fulfilling. And I still am. I'm a reservist, right? So actually next week I leave for 2 weeks of Army Reserve duty. So I get to,
Wow.
at 46 years old, I'm kind of the old Green Beret in my unit at this point, but I enjoy still being able to be a soldier. But having that base of growing up working on a farm, there's just something so pure about that. And when you do a day's work, you can look at the results of that work and see it. And so if I could earn a living as a farmer, I would love to do that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you for coming out to the Kollel, and thank you for your leadership, your friendship, and obviously your incredible work as Secretary of State, and your friendship for the Jewish people of the state of Israel. It means so much to us, and we know that your best days have yet to come, and we wish you so much success in everything you do.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate that.
Okay.
To listen to all Kolot episodes and see upcoming guests, visit kolotpodcast.com. We are also on all podcast players. Type in Kolot on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Podbean, and Amazon. Share with your friends, and please make sure to give us a 5-star review. Kolot is a project of the Columbus Community Kollel, a full-time Jewish learning center in Bexley, staffed with high-caliber Torah scholars. Ever since 1995, boys, girls, men and women from all backgrounds and affiliations have found many opportunities to connect with Torah and mitzvos at the Kollel. Whether it's a study partner, an engaging lesson, or a program, the Kollel is your one-stop shop for all your Jewish learning. If you want to know how you can benefit from the Kollel, visit thekollel.org. That is TheKollel.org, and forever be inspired.